So today we're going to be taking a look at how we can use Photopea to help draw out logos when we don't have the ability to use Photoshop, or realistically the best option is to use Adobe Illustrator. Without Illustrator, you don't normally have the ability to use vector graphics. But with Photopea, we're going to see how we can use both the rectangle select and ellipse select tool, as well as taking a look at the pen tool and being able to draw out graphics with the shapes tool. The pen tool and the shapes tool are a little bit more complicated because you don't necessarily have the freedom without rasterizing an image. And we'll talk about rasterization in a little bit. But first, let's begin by making sure that our auto select is on with the move tool. I have my move tool selected and auto select is already on before I've created a new document. Then I'm going to go to File and New. I'm going to look to set up my document. I can name this Logo Concepts. And for my document size, I'm just going to do a standard piece of paper, going with the width of 11, height of 8.5, and the DPI is 300 pixels. This will allow me a larger document with better resolution overall, rather than dealing with a web-based graphic that will be lower resolution. I'm going to keep my background as white, and then I'm going to click Create. So it's important to understand that we still need to maintain layers in Photopea as well as Photoshop or Illustrator. But if I take a look over the left side navigation, we're going to look to see how we can use the rectangle select and the ellipse select to help draw out simple shapes. And we can look to manipulate those and look to combine those and see how we can create more shapes from those two standard shapes. So with a rectangle select, it's important to build out a layer first, create a new layer that's going to sit on top of the background. We don't want to be drawing on the background, so we're able to manipulate or edit or add colors later on. So a standard shape we can look to draw out with a square. I can look to fill in this area. I can either use the paint bucket tool over on the left side navigation, and this will currently fill in with the foreground color. I can always change the foreground color, choose out a red or whatever color you want to look at. And with the paint bucket, I can simply click inside the area and it fills into that shape that we've drawn out. Same idea happens with the rectangle select. If I draw out a circle shape, if I want to maintain a perfect circle or create a perfect square, I hold down Shift on my keyboard, and then again I can look to change the color to whatever color I want and click on the paint bucket tool to fill into that area. If we're looking to combine shapes, we can use a combination of both the rectangle select and the ellipse select. I'm going to first draw out a rectangular shape and then go over back to the ellipse select, in which I can hold down Shift on my keyboard, and with Shift I can draw out an ovular shape that's going to sit at the top edge of my rectangle. And when I release, you're going to notice that they merge into one single piece. Now when I look to fill this in, I click on the paint bucket, click inside the area, and we see that I've now created more of a customized shape. If I wanted to get into coloring this, say to make it a piece of bread, I can look to change out the color. Again, fill into the area that I want. Then I'm going to deselect. With the deselect, it just helps that I can easily jump to another object if I want. Remember that I am currently on layer 1. Normally you'd want to separate out the individual layers so that they're all not on the same layer. But if I wanted to take this single piece of bread, I can look to do a couple various things, whether it's adding effects onto this object or adding strokes or creating other shapes on top of it. We can use a couple different combinations, whether it's using the Polygonal Lasso Tool to draw in highlight or shadowed areas on the object. And I can fill this color in. Or if I want to try putting a stroke on the outside edge of this object, remember we have the rectangle and the circle as well on the same layer, so it's going to apply onto all three of these images. So again, that's why it's important to make sure that you are creating separate layers for each object that you are working with. But if I go down to effects and go to stroke, I can look to change the color of the stroke, which is currently black. If I wanted to see the size and the difference of how that stroke is going to apply on, you can see that I've adjusted my size. We get that black stroke around the edge of the objects. I can always reduce this or type in a specific number. Or if I want to change the color of the stroke, I can look to adjust inside the color picker. And you see, as I'm clicking to find out a new color, I can see it applying onto the outside edge of what looks like a piece of bread. So just a combination of two different objects, the ellipse select and the rectangle select, helps me create out that shape of a bread. If I wanted to think about creating more design that is going to be part of a sandwich, I can look to duplicate and replicate a couple pieces. So I'm going to first take out the piece of the red square and the blue circle. I don't need those. But if I wanted to create out different sections, I'm going to make sure to create a new layer. And if I wanted to make this, say, a piece of ham or a piece of turkey, I can look to change out the color again. We can paint in this area. Let's just imagine that this is the piece of meat. We can again look to put on a stroke onto this object if I choose to put on a stroke. Or another alternative is change the color of inside of the object. So currently we have a bounding box around the square shape. If I wanted to modify the outer selection area, I can go up to select at the top navigation, go down to modify and contract. When I do contract, I'm going to reduce the size of the pixels. So it's going to cut into the object. So I'll type in 5 pixels. And we can see that it brought a little bit closer into the object overall. Now, because I brought in those outer edges, I can look to modify the inside color. So I'm going to go up to Image at the top navigation, Adjustments, Brightness and Contrast. And with the brightness, I'm going to push that up. And we see that it's leaving the darker edge of the pink around the outside edge of the pink square. I could also reset this back to what it was, or use Image Adjustments and Hue and Saturation, and then modify the lightness of this object, getting that lighter color pink on the inside. It's all a matter of preference for the designer, so you figure out what works for you. If I wanted to get into illustrating other elements, maybe I want to draw a tomato that goes with it. I can draw out a circular shape. Again, I need to create a new layer if I want to do a specific object or illustration just for this piece. We'll start out with the red color for the tomato. Use a paint bucket to fill it in. Again, I can look to contract around the outer edge to give a lighter variation on the inside. So I go to select, modify, contract. This time I'm going to change this to 10 pixels. Click OK. And again, I'm just going to lighten it up in the inside. Just push up the brightness a little bit. Or if that's not working, I can go back to image adjustments and hue and saturation, adjust the lightness on the inside there. So just getting lighter variation. And if I want to draw in the more triangular shapes of inside of the tomato, I can look to draw out using the Polygonal Lasso Tool. With the Polygonal Lasso Tool, I'm going to click point by point. I can make it more like a pizza slice. So I can go point by point to help kind of create that rounded edge to make it appear as if it's rounded on the top. And if I want to do all the pieces at once, I can hold down Shift on my keyboard, then let go of Shift, and then I can start drawing out more pieces that are cutting into creating that shape of the tomato. So again, hold down Shift, let go, then I can click point by point. Hold down Shift, let go. And this isn't perfect. I know that I could make it a lot cleaner, but it's just kind of an overview of how these tools work. Hold down Shift. Then once they're all created, I can either look to delete or modify again. I can change the color on the inside. I can experiment to see if I drop the lightness, does it help create more of a sense of a tomato. Or I can look to just simply hit backspace, cutting it out, kind of leaving an opening area. It's up to you, again, to kind of figure out what details you want to add into the design. If I want to give little shapes, draw it out to make it appear as if they're little seeds, I can use the regular lasso tool. Just draw out more seed-like shapes. Again, mine aren't perfect, but you could always replicate, just do one and simply copy and paste those into the other sections. So after having drawn a few circles to kind of create seeds, I can look to fill in the color of these seeds. You may want to do it on a separate layer just so you can modify it if you need. So I can click over to the layers panel, create a new layer, and change the color out. Maybe pick more of a yellow color or more of a muddled yellow color. And again, use the paint bucket, just click inside one of those and it should fill in every one. And the reason why we do the separate layers is that we can look to stack layers. If I wanted to have the piece of bread behind, I can play to create the arrangement, creating the sense that I'm making a sandwich. If I wanted to modify the size of just the bread itself, I can go up to Edit, Transform, Scale. Scale this up so the bread is a little bit bigger than the piece of meat or the tomato. And then I'm kind of just creating a sandwich shape. If I wanted to create the other piece of the bread, I can duplicate the layer. So I have two. Or you can hold down on Alt on your keyboard on a PC, or hold down Command on a Mac, or Option on a Mac, and click and drag to create a duplicate. So you can try to figure out how you can make many different objects, whether you're trying to make a taco, make a burger, make ice cream. It's all up to you depending on what you're trying to create. But if I wanted to rearrange and change the order, I can move layer 1 copy, which is the bread, on top of the other pieces, kind of helping to create the sense of depth and show the stacking of the different layers. If I wanted to get into more customization, I can look to create another layer. And this time I'm going to fill this in with green. And with this green shape, I can look to use the Smudge tool over on the left side navigation. Smudge tool is the third icon underneath of the blur tool. With the smudge, I can look to create an indent on the object. I'm going to look to scale up the size of my brush. But when I click and drag, I can create a little bend inside of the shape, creating a little manipulation. If I don't like that, because I've made a separate layer, I can look to experiment. I can go up to filter at the top navigation, liquefy. With the liquefy tool, the first option we have is the smudge. With the smudge, I can look to click and drag inward to create more of an indent on top of the shape. So it's not just a flat standard shape, but giving more of the sense that the lettuce has ripples. Again, I'm not trying to make this perfect. This is only going to be seen behind other layers. But once I'm satisfied with it, I can click OK. And we end up with more of a ruffled edge for our lettuce. I can look to add that into my sandwich. I can look to modify, change the rotation. I go up to Edit, Transform, Rotate. Or I can play with the size again. Back to Edit, Free Transform, just so I can rotate and scale. But that way we're creating the sense that we're creating layers of a sandwich. When it comes into a logo, though, we want to think about, does our logo work black and white first? If it doesn't work in black and white, it's not going to work in color. So it's important that you start from the basics and getting in the standard shapes first, making sure that it can work in a black and white variation. So all these different logos that we could possibly look at, as much as most have colors, some are outlines, just strokes, some are black and white, some have those different colors that show the meat, the cheese, the lettuce, and all the different ingredients inside. But if it does not work in black and white, it cannot work as a color logo, because not every time you're going to have the ability to show the logo in color. So you have to make sure that the logo works in black and white as well. That goes for ice creams with their logos. If it doesn't work in black and white, it needs to be modified so it can. Same thing for tacos. So if I want to put this away for right now, I'm just going to slide this out of the way. I'm actually going to group this just so we don't have to see this. And then I'm going to create a new layer. And you can use the paintbrush tool to help draw out what you're looking to do. If I want to use the paintbrush, you can. The problem is that it's not going to necessarily give you the sharpest edges. But you still can have the freedom to try drawing out what you're trying to accomplish. The problem is it's not necessarily going to be the perfect edges that you may be looking for. So again, I can draw out what I want. If I hold down Shift, I can still get a perfect line to help draw out the meat and cheese, the different objects that I might need to help create the sandwich. I can imagine that one of these is a piece of cheese. Just draw it out in that shape, and then maybe have the meat underneath. Because I'm making sure that the black connects, I can later use the paint bucket tool to fill in these colors. So if I wanted to have brown for the meat, I can click inside the area to fill in these areas later on and create the meat or change the color and make certain areas the cheese or the tomato. All depends on what you're trying to create with your design. But the paint bucket tool or the paintbrush tool is a very convenient way of drawing out the shapes. Just going to, again, be more freeform. You can get straight edges holding Shift, but eventually you will have to do some freehand. If I wanted to do more of a taco shape, again, I can use the Shapes tool or the ellipse and select. I'm going to create a new layer. Draw out more of an ovular shape and fill this in. So if I fill it in with black for right now, I can then go over to the rectangle select and look to cut out the top portion or the bottom portion of this ellipse. Now I have part of the taco shell. I can, again, always manipulate the color of this object. If I wanted to make this white, I could use the paint bucket tool, or I could use the layer style, the EFF effects down the bottom right side. I could do a color overlay, maybe changing this out to red or change this out to yellow. And then just like we did with the sandwich, we can look to add in elements behind it. Just a matter of making new layers that are going to sit behind. So again, with the Lasso Tool, I can create the sense of lettuce coming outside of the taco. I made sure to create a new layer before I fill it in. But with the foreground color. I'm just going to change it back to that green. Click inside the area. Now I have the green sitting on top of the taco shell, but I can move it behind so it appears behind it. If I want to use the lasso tool to draw out pieces of cheese or pieces of meat, all depends on what you're trying to create with your design. Maybe these are peppers or other vegetables inside of it. Again, I'm going to make sure to create a separate layer for each of these just so it doesn't get confusing and you're able to reorder things if you need to. So I'm going to duplicate layer 6 to give me the back part of the shell. And with the back part of the shell, I can look to arrange places this behind the meat or the lettuce. I may want to put a stroke on this so I can see this a little bit better. So with the stroke, I'm going to make that brown so it stands out. Same thing for the other version, adding in a stroke. Just a matter of figuring out what's going to help give you the best solution for creating out your logo design. So I can group all of these. What I'm going to do is select all the different pieces that make up the taco, and then I'm going to click on this folder icon down the bottom right side of the layers panel. And I can rename this taco. What this did was put all the layers that made up the taco in the same group, the same folder. That way I'm not going to get confused with other layers or with other logos or different designs. But now that I have the taco, I can move this out of the way. And even though we're drawing out a sandwich or a food product, we want to make sure that we're somehow customizing these to make them more than just a sandwich. Every company can do a sandwich for a logo or a food product for a logo, but what's going to make yours stand out compared to everybody else's? What's going to make yours eye-catching, dynamic? The other tools that you can consider using are the pen tool. With the pen tool, I like the pen tool because it gives me a little bit more ability, something I'm more comfortable with. With the pen tool, I can create curves or create straight lines. If I want to create a curve, I can click and drag. And you see that I can bend objects into the angle that I want. It takes some getting used to. Just a matter of you getting comfortable with what you think is going to help draw out the design. The problem is that you're now used to coloring out an object. Unlike the way that we've drawn out the taco or the other shapes, you can see shape 1 is created. It created its own separate layer because this is currently a vector image. If I want to change the color, what I have to do is click on the object's thumbnail over in the layers panel, and then I can pick out a color. And as I click and drag over to the red, you see that changes the color of the object to red. If I wanted to make this white, you see that it's automatically going to change the color of the object in front of you. But if I want to put a stroke on it, I can still apply onto the strokes. I'm going to put this back to black. Okay. Unlike using the ellipse select and the rectangle select, you can't combine shapes as easy as it was with those other tools. With the pen tool, I can look to use the path select or direct select to modify the shapes. So the direct select, if I want to change one specific point, I can click and drag, modifying out the shape, or bend it and rotate it using the handles on the object. I can select out any areas that I want, but you have to be careful because it does get finicky when trying to manipulate out certain angles. But this should be a little bit more familiar if you've used Gravit or used Illustrator. So once you get used to this, then you can look to see how we can distort out shapes. So if I wanted to start out, I'm going to try creating an ice cream scoop and an ice cream cone. What I would want to do is use the pen tool, and because I'm going away from the object that I'm currently working on, it's automatically going to create its own separate layer. Make sure to deselect. Then with the pen tool, I'm going to click a point, move back up, try to create more of a triangular shape. When I close it up, I'm then going to look to apply a stroke onto the object just so I can see it. Just a black and white stroke. I can modify the thickness if I want, make it thicker. Then I can look to use the pen tool with the pen tool, I can look to try drawing out more of a circular shape or try give it more of a melted look. So trying to create the sense that the cone is melting over the cone. But unlike Illustrator, this doesn't give us the best control. So if I ever want to undo something, I can always hit Control Z on a PC or Command Z on a Mac. So once I have the shape drawn out, I can look again, put it in a stroke just so I can see it. And this created the shape on the inside the taco. I can always move this above and change the placement. Once I have it created, I can look to see how I can modify this shape itself. Make sure you have that just layer 3 selected. And again, I can go back down to the path select or direct select. I can also use the pen tool if I want to create little highlights or strokes. I'm going to change out the color to black just so we can see it. Move this above so we can see that. And with the pen tool, I'm just going to close this back up to make it come off as a shadow or a little line on top of the snow cone or the ice cream cone, kind of helping create dimension. I always look to manipulate it or scale it if I want. Go up to edit, transform. I can fit it better to the shape overall. Be careful when you are trying to select that you're selecting all the layers. You can see that's grabbing layers that aren't over this image, but it just seems to be grabbing everything. But again, we're going to be designing in black and white first. Just wanted to show you how we can change out colors to be able to make different elements. But then you can think about how we're going to enhance this overall, so they're not just pictures of a piece of food. What else can you add? If I wanted to add in a design around the outside of the ice cream cone, maybe I wanted to give a blob shape behind it. I'm going to click on the pen tool, click and drag to help create more of a blob shape. Then I can change out the color itself. Double click on shape 6. I can move layer 6 underneath of the cone just so we can see it behind the object, not interfering with it. If I want to scale it up, I can always again go up to edit, free transform, maybe pull it out wider or rotate it on an angle. All depends on what your preference is. Once you do start to get the visual image, you can look to test out different fonts, how font is going to sit with the logos themselves. Is the text going to wrap above or below the object? Is it going to be off to the side? You can have a number of different variations, but it's just a matter of making sure that we are consistent overall. So I'm going to scale this down just so we can fit some text into this. And you see that the stroke ends up scaling down. I'm going to end up creating a duplicate of all of this just so I have it. And then I'm going to flatten this or merge these layers together. Let's rasterize these first and then merge the group of this ice cream. Now I've merged these together without affecting the original. I can hide out the original so I don't have them distracting me. But when now I scale this down, I go edit, free transform, I can pull this down to make this smaller, and you see that the stroke is not affected anymore. But then I can look to wrap text if I wanted to have the title. I can draw a text box. You can change out the size of the font. I'm going to duplicate this layer so I can give another layer underneath of it. So if I hold down Alt, click and drag, then I can change out the text for this box. I'm going to center this text so it fits in the middle. Same thing for laces. I'm going to go to the type tool, highlight the text, center. I can pick out a original font, something that's going to work for me. So instead of the default Deja Vu Sans, I can see what's going to work overall. I can find something more playful, or I can always go to defont.com. Pick out something more cartoonish. Let's say pumpkin story. Or if I want to experiment and see what Lacey's ice cream looks like in a certain font. You want to make sure the font and the image work cohesively together. So for right now, I'm going to use the almond nougat. I'm going to click download over on the right side. Then I'm going to go back to Photopea. I'm going to go up to the fonts and I'm going to hit load font. Then I can choose out the almond nougat at the top. And now it's installed. I can find it, type in almond, I see almond nougat. Now I have the font for Lacey's, and I can do the same thing for ice cream down below. Then I can look to experiment, be more playful with the text. I can scale it up if I want. I can adjust the size of the font, make it bigger. If the text is not big enough for the text box, expand the text box out. I can look to then play with the warp. I'm going to go back to the type tool and click on warp. I can change the warp and change the arc or change the arch. Arch will give me the text to stay linear on the left and right side. So if you see the difference, I choose arc, it's going to stretch the text outward over on the left and right side. Whereas if I choose arch, it will keep the sides even vertically over on the left and right sides. So this is just a sample, Lacey's ice cream, but realistically, you can do a lot better. I have faith that you can be more creative with your designs, but you have a sense of how the tools work in Photopea.